All right, welcome to the Daring CEO podcast. My name is Denise Klein. I am your host, and I am here with one of my favorite people. She's a client of mine, and I can't wait for you to hear her story and the wonderful things that she does for her clients. So, I would like to introduce you to Beth Blacker of It's Just Stuff. Thank you for coming and spending some time with me this morning.
Really happy to be here. As you know, it's a little early here in Colorado, but I am not somebody who sleeps, so it was a whatever.
There you go. Yeah, so I'm on the East Coast and Beth is in Colorado, Boulder area,
Yep.
right? Yeah. So if you happen to be in the Colorado area, then Beth can be of service to you. So what we're going to do here in our podcast today is we're going to learn about Beth's journey to becoming a daring CEO herself, and then just about her story. And then we're going to talk about her business and how she is of service and that sort of thing. So, Beth, why don't you tell us a little about your story?
Sure. So, I think as it relates to becoming a professional organizer, I think it's really in your DNA to want to do this. I know that social media has really glamorized the industry in the last, decade or so, but the reality is that it really does take, I think, a special type of person to do this and have the compassion to do it, but at the same time be have to be ruthless with people. Because otherwise, as I always say, what's the point of hiring us? But I think I came to this because I was just born this way. I'm wearing a hat right now that I realize it says Mama Bear Hair Don't Care. I normally wear a hat that says Chaos Coordinator, but couldn't find it. And that doesn't bode well for me as a professional organizer. But I think, what I tell people is that I am so focused, so hyper focused on my clients when I'm there that I'm not thinking about me or anything, that's going on in my life. I'm there for them and only them. Even as a young kid, I think that I was just one of those people that liked order. I didn't really understand why it was so important to me, and I'm relatively certain that there have been people in my life, my family, my ex-husbands, who thought that I was a little obsessive about needing that order and that routine. But as you and I were just recently talking about, um, I was undiagnosed with ADD my entire life until I was in my 50s. And one of the things about having ADD is that you really do crave that routine, that order in your life, but you don't always know how to get it. And I think that being the way that I was when I was younger and being a girl who, wasn't perceived as having ADD because back then it was you were climbing the walls if you had ADD. And I was climbing inside my own body. How's that? I
Amen.
was, probably a little bit more anxious than most people, wanted perfection, really overcompensated for many, many, many years, decades,
Yeah.
until I was diagnosed. And, in the meantime, I was still trying to create those systems and that order for myself, for my family, for friends. And, I think that again, it came down to overcompensating and not realizing why this was so important to me. So being diagnosed in my 50s was huge. And I think it gave me even more of a purpose when I decided to go into this business really full time with full intention, in a way that I had never done before. I'd gone in and out of doing this for many, many years. I've always had a very entrepreneurial spirit. Um, I think that it's probably one of the reasons that I never really succeeded in corporate type jobs because I'm, very driven and I have lots of ideas, and sometimes I can implement them and do well, and sometimes, as an entrepreneur you do fail, and that's okay. It was always okay. But I'm really proud of, after all the years of trying to as I often say, put my square peg in somebody else's round hole, that I finally figured it out in 2020 that this was really what I should be doing. And the pandemic helped. It really did in this iteration of the business because it was finally the time that I really fully launched as a full-blown intentional professional organizing and move management business. Before that, I was going in and out and not really committed to it,
Mm.
but I was doing so many other things, like the typical ADD
ADHD.
entrepreneur,
Right,
um,
right.
that I, was not realizing that this really was my true passion, and especially at this stage in my life.
Well, and
You know,
I think because you have that background, and as we were just discussing before the call, I was just recently diagnosed with ADHD
right.
last summer, and actually just started medication at 50. And I think not to turn this into an ADHD conversation, but what I said earlier, I'm like, of course I have clutter. I have ADHD because
Yeah.
we were looking at your got clutter
Yeah.
t-shirt. But I think you bring a unique perspective because you do have that background. And for so many people, um, you know, needing to hire an organizer might be because, well, we're going to have a new baby or we're going to move house, and it doesn't have the emotional piece to it that other people have, when
Right.
that specifically ADHD and other any kind of mental illness where
Right.
anxiety is a big part of it.
Right.
And
Brain injuries.
exactly. So
Yeah.
there's a myriad of reasons that people end up with clutter. And I think it's interesting, again, that you're coming at it from having some of that experience, for you to create that calm atmosphere for yourself. You wanted things to be super tidy. And I know that when my space is tidy, I certainly feel better. And so we do have kind of these coping mechanisms when you're coming from a place of anxiety. And so I love that you bring that. And I love too, one of the other things I was reading about ADHD, because I'm reading a ton about that now. It's remarkable the number of people that are entrepreneurs that are ADHD. But I think part
Very
of it is
common.
because kind of out of the box thinking
Yep.
and maybe a little defiant, want to do things our own way, kind of lends itself
Yeah.
to being an entrepreneur.
Yeah. And his name's escaping me right now, but there is somebody that talks about ADD as being a blessing and a curse.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that. I really do. And, you know, there's a lot of misconception around what ADD really is. And
Absolutely.
I have a very good friend here who's a coach for parents with kids that have ADD. So we've talked about this a lot. She was actually the one that kind of diagnosed me.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at her when she did, and I thought, what are you talking about? Like, I like order. I focus till, I drop at 3 a.m. And she's like, that's the problem. It's
Hyper
not the
focus.
inability to focus, it's the inability to regulate your focus.
Exactly. And that is maybe the best way I've heard it explained so
Yeah,
far. Because a lot of people do, they think, well, the hyperactivity, and they think, little boys climbing the walls,
right,
right?
right.
And like you said, it's you are climbing your interior walls.
Yeah,
And it is, especially for women, it is kind of this whole interior thing.
right,
And yeah, it is a blessing and a
right.
curse. And
Well, it's an interior thing for women because we were told
mhm.
behave, you know?
Oh, for sure. So much of my
Yeah,
masking, like you were saying, like I was thinking, I can't be ADHD.
right,
I'm never late to anything.
right,
I turn in, no, I was last minute doing stuff, but I always
right.
turn things in on time. But I realized so much of what I was doing was masking. I would get places early.
Yep.
I would go the day before and scout it out and make sure there was a parking place, that I knew exactly where I was going. It was
Yeah,
all masking and anxiety,
yeah.
being the first one in the office in the morning and the last one out.
Yep.
Anxiety, staying up till
Yep.
3 o'clock in the morning and make sure everything is perfect. Anxiety
Yep.
and hyperfocus when it's
Yep.
something you're super excited about. So it's just this interesting blend of things, which in an entrepreneurial world, again, blessing and a
And
curse.
curse. Yeah.
So, at what point did you officially start It's Just Stuff?
The very first time I ever labeled it, It's Just Stuff, was in 2011. I was still living in Tampa at the time.
Hmm.
And I started two businesses at the same time. Don't ask.
ADHD.
Yes. I am my own version of crazy.
Mhm.
And I'm okay with it. It just
Absolutely.
is what
Embrace
it
the
is.
crazy.
Right. Yeah, we're all on the crazy spectrum. I'm
Indeed.
convinced. Um, but I started that iteration when I was living in Tampa. Still had kids that were in school. I was married for the second time. Was realizing like I really, really no longer even wanted to try and put my square peg in their round hole. Working for, at that time, a foreclosure and bankruptcy law firm during the big meltdown, and
Yeah.
hated the job, absolutely hated it. And so I, was trying to figure out things that I could do on the side to sort of decompress from that job. And this was one of the things that I decided. I also decided to start a baking business that did really start to take off, and this business unfortunately did go by the wayside for many years, but I still, it was still something that was just ingrained in me to always want to have order and make sure there was systems in place. I remember when I was married to my first husband, my husband at the time said to my mother, listen, if she ever puts me in a box, just make sure like somebody punches holes in it so I can breathe. And I'm fine with my ex-husband now, but at the time, I remember my mother, who was like Switzerland, like never got like upset at anybody, never got angry, and she got very upset with my husband when it was announced that we were getting divorced, and she's like, "I'll put holes in that box now," and stabbing away.
There you go.
Um, but this iteration, I when I moved to Colorado, I remember my father saying, "Well, you're just going to have to get a real job." I'm like, "What's a real job anymore? Like what does that
They're
mean?" But
very different now. Yeah.
yeah, but to him it meant, W-2, regular paycheck, benefits, stability, but that doesn't really exist either. It really
Mm-mm.
doesn't. And I
Mm-mm.
just kept trying to find the job that was going to be perfect for me, and it just I never found it. I just didn't. And let's also remember I was over 50 at the time and a woman, and we're irrelevant to the corporate world. It doesn't matter
After a
how many
certain point,
years
it
of,
does. Yeah.
yeah, I had 30 some odd years of business development, client relations, customer service experience, management in a lot of different industries. I actually started out in the food industry. I went to culinary school after college and
Mhm.
worked in New York doing food service management, really high-end subsidized food service accounts. It was great. But again, I was still working. I was proud of the fact that I was working for a very small boutique company, and you felt like you were really contributing until
Yeah.
they
Part
sold
of
to the
it.
bigger company,
Mhm.
and suddenly you're just a cog in the wheel and you feel, irrelevant and useless. So, I kept trying to find the jobs, and here, after about a year and a half, I had a friend who was retiring as a professional organizer, and she's like, "Well, why don't you just do that full time, and I'll send all my clients to you." And so I did it for about a year and a half that way. No team of people, no marketing, no website, just all word of mouth. And it worked until I had that one client who sadly was an alcoholic. I was going to her once a week for 3 or 4 hours as a personal assistant, and I arrived too many times where she was drunk, and I just said, "I'm sorry, this is just a boundary I'm not willing to cross." She begged me to come back one more time, and I did, and she was really, really like inebriated, drunk, like 8 o'clock in the morning, had to call 911 kind of thing. And she threatened me. She came after me because I told her I had to call the paramedics, and she said, "You call them over your dead body," kind of thing. And she lunged at me with this thing that you use to grab cans off of a shelf. And I moved out of the way. She fell face first into the couch. Had I not been there, she would have suffocated to death. Yeah, so that freaked me out. And I had a conversation later that day. I remember with my daughter. She's like, "Mom, can you stop doing this? This is really freaking me out. You're walking into strangers' homes. It's really not safe." And I'm like, "Yeah, you're probably right." So, I went back to that, real job thing for about, that was probably June of 19, I think it was. And I found a job right away working for a company, but got laid off later on that year. And so that was right around the holidays of 19. Found a couple of contract jobs, and that led into March of 2020, which If you were alive and breathing at that time, you know what that means. And I lost the contract because COVID hit,
Yeah.
everything shut down, and I found myself kind of with nothing to do. I actually had to leave Colorado during the initial lockdown and went and stayed with my brother and sister-in-law in California, and there was just nothing to do all day except be online and complain about having nothing to do, right?
Right.
But there were a lot of people that were saying things like, I don't know what to do about my family. The house is total chaos. Nobody cares. There are desks everywhere, computers everywhere, school papers everywhere. And, so I would insert myself into those conversations. And slowly but surely, people were asking me, well, when the lockdown ends, I need you to come to my house. And so I did. And over the course of that summer, I was still working primarily alone. But I woke up that one Monday morning that all entrepreneurs wake up and look at their calendar and go, oh crap, I don't have any clients this week. What am I going to do? And as an entrepreneur, you got to keep busy, right? You have to have things to do. My father happened to have called me and he's like, what are you doing home? I'm like, what are you calling me if you're asking that question for? And I said, but as it turns out, I don't have any clients this week. It's like, just go get a real job again. Like you make it sound like it's so easy in the middle of a pandemic.
Right.
Um, but I did. I found the job where the owner said, I really need somebody to just come in and be, a clone of me. And I said, well, I think I can do that. I said, but be careful what you wish for
Mhm.
because I'm a lot. And I admit it, I do. But I say this all the time. I may be a pain in the ass, but I think I'm a really hardworking, driven, fun, daring pain in the ass.
There
And
you
and
go.
I'm okay with that. I really am. So, that job only lasted 2 months and suddenly on a Friday afternoon, my daughter, is calling me and I told her what happened. She's like, there you go, doing that thing again. I'm like, what thing? She's like, the thing about the square and the peg. And I'm like, oh my God, you were actually listening to
They
me?
do listen sometimes.
Wow. Um, and she's like, Mom, you really got to, do this differently this time. Like I really believe you could be, really successful at this if you just really put more into it. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm 50 some odd years old. I don't know how much I have to put into it, but I am somebody with a lot of energy and I go all day and all night and I knew I could do it. It was just scary. It was
Yeah.
daring and scary at the same time, right?
Yeah.
But she convinced me. And she also said that she would help me. And I love my daughter with all my heart and soul. Her version of help, my version of help, two slightly different things. And, in her defense, it was a crazy time. She was living in New York. Things, we were going through the election cycle. They had just gone through all the Black Lives Matters riots, and it was still a horrible pandemic, right? And she was, rightfully stressed and anxious about stuff. And so, I did end up hiring people to help. And that was an investment in me.
Yeah.
And I had to do it because there was I just don't have the skill set to do certain things like design a website. I mean, why did I hire you?
There you go. There you go.
Um, and as you know, there's somebody else that's part of my little
Hmm.
team
Hmm.
across the United States. Susan Mann from
Hmm.
local Herbert Agency in Arizona does all my social media. You do
Hmm.
all my back end stuff, and
Hmm.
and that's really important to realize that you can't do it all as an entrepreneur. The idea of being a solopreneur is awful, in my opinion, because you shouldn't set people up to think that they do have to go at it alone.
Yeah.
Thank God, we met, through the internet, right? Like
Yep. The
through
glory of the internet. Yep.
the glory of the internet. And it's really important to understand
Hmm.
what your limitations are and what your strengths versus your weaknesses are. And I say it to my clients through
Hmm.
every single consult. This just happens to be my superpower.
Hmm.
And I have a lot of teachers, nurses that are clients, and I say to them all the time, never will I ever be a nurse or a teacher. I
Yeah.
love that you have that as your passion, Me, no way, no how. And I told my kids this during the pandemic. You are so lucky you're not in school anymore because my biggest threat to them was that I would homeschool them if they didn't do their homework and do everything properly. And it
Yeah.
was like that was it. Like they did not want to be homeschooled by me. Certainly I didn't want to be homeschooling them either. But,
Yeah.
we all have our strengths. We all
We
have our
do.
superpowers, right? On my website, I have a picture of me, doing the Superwoman pose,
Mhm.
standing over the great sand dunes in Colorado, watching the sunset. I mean, that's where I get my strength, my energy from is living in this beautiful place that I get to call home now. And I can't imagine being anywhere else but here,
Yeah.
getting the energy and the enthusiasm for what I do. Nobody should be shamed for not being able to do something that somebody else can do, but we're really good in this country at shaming people.
Oh my
And
goodness.
one of the biggest things they shame people over is their inability to have good executive functioning skills. And I don't know where it's written that says everybody's supposed to be able to know how to organize their lives, their homes, whatever. It's not really taught in school, and we think that the internet makes everything so much easier. Instead, it just stresses everybody out because they see the images online of perfection and they think that's how they're supposed to be, and that is not what I ever set up my clients to believe. They have to be set up for their own version of success. I'm just the guide, on their journey. I had, and I think I mentioned this to you when it first happened a couple months ago. I'm very active in my community, and I was at a Boulder Chamber event, and I met somebody for the first time who runs a trekking company in Nepal, and he's got Sherpas, right? And when he asked me what I do, I said, I guess I'm kind of a Sherpa, I think. In that proverbial way, I'm leading people up the mountain on their own little journey. And if they lose their breath, if they get tired, they go back down to base camp and, we leave them for the day and, regroup and we come back the next day to try and climb back up the proverbial mountain. And it really does come down to that this is a journey for them as much as it is for me, but it's not for me to decide how their journey is ultimately going to end. So, the buy-in has to be there from, not only the person that I'm working directly with, but if they have other people living in their home, the
Absolutely.
family has
Buy-in
to
from
buy in
everyone
too.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or it's never going to work. It's just
Hmm.
not going to work.
Yeah.
And you have to make peace with it if it's not going to work.
Hmm.
And that's really hard. I mean, I had to make peace with it with my family. I thought I should be able to teach everybody how to do this, even though, I didn't know that I had ADD back then,
Yeah.
but I still felt like I could be a teacher and a guide and a spiritual leader. I don't know. Um,
Yeah.
you know, I,
Hmm.
I mean, I thought I was going to be president of the United States when I was 10 years old. So now I'm just president of this
There you
world,
go.
you
I
know?
love it.
Um, so yeah, I just want people to feel as though, the whatever chaos has been swirling around them their entire life, that they can find their own version of calm, by me being there, holding, I talk about, coming in with open eyes, open ears, open hands, open heart, open mind, because, sorry, um, I, I really think it does take an incredibly open mind. There's no judgment. There's no room for judgment. There's no
Well, and I
room.
think that a lot of people what would keep people from reaching out for help. Number one, I think in this country, we have a hard time asking for help.
Right.
Even just thinking, going back to the entrepreneur, the solo entrepreneur,
Yeah.
asking for help, bringing in help, all that can be daunting. And I would think, if you're in a situation in your home where you need your services, where you need an organizer, whether it's a little bit or a lot, I would think reaching out and asking for help is hard. I
Yeah.
think in part because they worry about the judgment
Yeah.
aspect of it.
Yeah. I got a text message at, I think it was after 11 no, it was before 11. But nevertheless, it was late in the evening, and it's the client that I'm going to today after we're done. And
Hmm.
she's like, I'm panicking. I can't believe I'm letting you into my house tomorrow. I feel like I
Yeah.
have to stay up all night long just to clean. And I'm like, and I called her immediately and I'm like, stop, please
Hmm.
stop. Like, No, there's no reason to panic. This is why you called. This is why, we're doing this because you don't want to feel this way anymore. And I'm coming to teach you how not to panic anymore when things get really out of control. I'm not a therapist, but
Right.
certainly, that's kind of the role that I get put
Yeah.
into. I'm also put in the caseworker, the social worker role when it comes to, especially, I have a senior client right now who she claims she has a brain injury, but it's undiagnosed. I definitely sense some paranoia, probably some dementia, but I'm not a doctor. And I
Right.
can't force her to go see a doctor.
Mm-mm.
So, all I can do is bring my years of experience and just, trying to be as compassionate as I can possibly be with another human being and get them to the other side and get the clearing that they need
Yeah.
to not only feel better but be safe in their own home. I mean, the
Right.
number of homes that I walk into that it's just not safe. The
Yeah.
amount of stuff, and especially if it's a senior and they're using a walker of any kind, or if it is somebody with a brain injury, no matter what age, their focus and their balance are all off. It's really dangerous when they don't have a clear space. It really is.
Yeah. Not to
So
mention, I've had we talked about the word hoarder
yeah,
earlier. I actually had someone in my family that was a bit of a hoarder, and you're right, it is unsafe, but then there's the cleanliness aspect of it too that also makes it unsafe. And what a lot of people don't realize, whether it's hoarding, ADHD, no matter how much mess it is, sometimes that executive function, just not even knowing where to start, like just
right,
completely feeling overwhelmed,
right,
is a very typical thing. So when you
right.
go into somebody's space like that, how do you help them decide where to start?
My team sometimes watches me as I walk into a house, even though I've done I usually do virtual consults. It's not often that
Hmm.
I do in-person consults anymore unless it's really important
Hmm.
to, because you can see enough to understand what's going on a
Hmm.
computer screen.
Hmm.
Seniors, though, of course, want the comfort of me coming in
Of
person a
course.
lot. And that's fine.
Hmm.
But I think that I'm scanning the room,
Hmm.
and again, this comes back to me having hyperfocus ADD. I scan the room as quickly as possible, and I find that space where the low-hanging fruit is, because you want to set them up for success as quickly as
Yeah.
possible, and you want to set yourself up for success too, because otherwise you feel defeated in the first 5 minutes, or at least I do,
Mhm. No, I
because
think that makes
again,
perfect sense. Yeah,
perfection,
quick
anxiety,
wins.
right?
Yeah, quick wins lead to some
Yeah.
momentum. So that makes
Yeah.
perfect
Yeah.
sense.
And you just build on that momentum. In the first hour, sure, it usually takes for them to feel like they're ramping up and that, we're getting, making some headway. And then we get into, like the normal session is about 4 to 5 hours, because again, it takes that first hour to sort of like start climbing up the mountain, right? We're back to the Sherpa
Sherpa. Hmm.
analogy, right? And then you start to level off. You feel like your lungs can handle, less oxygen at that point, and but you're still breathing. You're still breathing, but you're balanced. And I want to just find that low hanging fruit, and then just keep building on that, peeling back the layers, figuring out what the true triggers are for them. Often, like, why is it that this is so hard for them? A lot of the times it's because of past traumas going back to childhood, abuse or neglect, or just undiagnosed ADD, yeah,
Other
or
mental
mental
health
illness,
issues. Hmm.
or a desire for perfection, whatever it may be. And so you start to see them get comfortable and getting into the groove with you, and there's no better feeling for me. For
Yeah.
them, they're still probably a little anxious, but once we get through that first session and they can see the little wins, the little clearings, I think that then becomes the continuing motivating factor. I'm not going to say every client can continue. Some clients just have me there for one day to get them going. Others need me for the rest of their lives, maybe once a month or once a quarter or once a year. that's fine too. Again, no judgment. But the ones that are kind of in between where, it's a multi-day, maybe, a month-long kind of project, and you get to that final day where, you've got your final after picture that you get to take, and you hold up your phone and show the client the before and the after. And oh, I get like even a little emotional
Oh,
thinking
I
about it
love
right
seeing
now.
that.
It's so, it's just, it's beautiful. Like, I
It
don't know,
is.
what else to say about it. I mean, it's just
Well,
so
it
heartwarming.
represents so much growth for
Yeah,
them
yeah,
in that time, and they can see what
yeah,
can be accomplished
yeah.
in that
I've
time.
had clients that, I mean, one of my pandemic stories is a client that took her pandemic relief money to hire me.
Hmm.
And I'm like, of all the things that you might need, why me? She's like, because I have to feel better in my space so that I feel better in my life.
Yeah,
It was
yeah,
that simple for her.
it is.
And she ran out of pandemic relief money before we were done,
Hmm.
but I felt very strongly to continue to help her.
Hmm.
And we became Facebook friends. She's introduced me to other people. I've watched her daughter grow up online over the last 4 years, and it's just these people become a part of your life,
They do.
sometimes
Yeah.
forever, because you bond with them. I mean, it's a very emotional experience that you share with them,
Mhm.
and it's different than talk therapy. It
It
just
is.
is. It
Yeah.
really is. It is coaching, no doubt
Hmm.
about it.
Absolutely.
Um, but for me, having been somebody who did talk therapy throughout my adult life and still does it, I think I've come to realize that talk therapy is not the be all end all. That,
Yeah,
you
it's
know,
maybe one piece.
it's one
Yeah.
very small piece, because they're not going
Hmm.
to come into your home. They're in
No.
your head, but they're not
Hmm.
in your home. And
Yeah.
there's a big difference, because we talk about how internal clutter causes external clutter. And
Hmm.
somebody like a therapist can help you manage your internal clutter. Somebody, like me, can help you manage your external clutter. And there needs to be that positive triangulated relationship.
Yeah.
When I walk into somebody's home, like this client that I did earlier this week. No, what day are we? What is today?
Tuesday.
Tuesday. When was I there? Oh, last week. Sorry.
That's okay.
My days really do blur together.
That's okay.
Um, when I, walked into her home, and, for the first time, and, we started talking to her, and, I realized that, you know, she really needs, some sort of mental health team.
Yeah.
I am never going to be able to make enough of a dent unless she does. And
Mhm.
that's okay. But convincing her of it and her actually doing it, I don't know if it'll happen. I really don't. So,
Yeah, I would think that that's when you get the most impact, is when they have that emotional mental support, whether that's from family or an
right,
actual therapist or whatever, and then you in the same time. um, I think that's when you would have the most success. I think,
yeah,
you go to therapy and you get these ideas of things you can do at home, but knowing how to actually create a system and
right.
create, you know um, even just some of the habits, right,
Well,
and how we think about things.
it's the physical work too that we do. I
Hmm.
mean,
Absolutely.
some people just can't do it.
Mm-mm.
Whether they're physically or mentally incapacitated, or they're just a senior that just
They
doesn't have
can't,
the
just
strength,
physically can't. Yeah.
Listen, I have neuropathy, and at some point my hands and feet are going to give out on me.
Mm.
And that's one of the reasons why I decided to build my business differently this iteration during the
Yeah.
pandemic, build up the team, do the mass marketing, really, get the momentum and everything
Yeah.
going, so that I can send my team out to do the physical work, so that I can be back doing more of the business development, but more
Yeah.
importantly, the advocacy work, which I know you and I have talked about.
Mhm.
That component of my life, forget about my business, but my
Mhm.
overall life has always been really important to me. And I feel very, very strongly about advocating on behalf of my clients, because they don't know how to advocate for themselves. And let's face it, it is really hard to advocate for anything in this country.
That's true.
The my personal experience with mental health um, really happened as a result of my second marriage. And I'm not saying that I was doing therapy and whatever, but I'm talking about a very serious mental health crisis involved my ex-husband's son, who is mentally ill and sadly had threatened to kill me. And said on social media he would not feel guilty about it. So, through 10 years of trying to navigate that mental health care system on his behalf, it's awful. It's
Yeah.
horrible. And so if somebody of relatively sound mind and body, can't navigate it, how do you expect somebody who is mentally ill to navigate it? And yet we leave people to fend for themselves. It's survival of the fittest, right? Which, I have a yoga instructor who says it shouldn't be survival of the fittest, should be survival of the kindest, who can help the people that really do need help. Um, so, I feel very strongly that my services really should be covered by insurance for a lot of people. But good
Yeah.
luck trying to get that done
Yeah.
in the environment that we're in, especially today.
Well, and I think you're right. I mean, without going down any kind of political rabbit hole,
Nope.
because we don't want to go there, but in this country, I think it is.
I'll just flash my nails at you.
Yeah. I do think that we are in a situation in this country where mental health, though it gets talked about a bit in the media, they're just getting any kind of assistance is very difficult, much
Yeah,
less if you've got to deal with insurance companies
yeah,
and all the other things. And so I totally agree with you. And you don't know what other people are going through.
yeah,
And I think people make a lot of assumptions
yeah.
about mental health and, you know, just
There's
trying to
so much
survive.
shame and there's such
Hmm.
a stigma. But one of I'm very involved in, the Mental Health Awareness Month, and they've had a hashtag for years, I am stigma free.
Hmm.
And that's really is what it comes down to, is that it's about judgment and attaching stigmas.
Hmm.
And who are we to judge somebody else? We're not walking in their shoes. The
Hmm.
same way nobody was ever walking in my shoes throughout my life, especially when I was going through that mental health crisis with my ex-husband and his son. And people were saying, you're going to leave your husband because his son's mentally ill? I'm like, yeah, because I kind of value my life. It's about my self-preservation and survival. And if the system failed us, that means I'm gonna probably die as a result of it. And I
Right.
didn't want that. I certainly didn't want it for his son. I certainly
No.
didn't want, it's not what I wanted for him, but the sad reality is we don't have a lot of choices of
Hmm.
what to do in those situations. So, and my hands are tied when I walk into a client who is struggling with mental illness, because again, I'm not licensed by the state. I'm
Right.
not certified, I'm not required to be certified in anything. I am a Sherpa. That's
Right.
all that I am.
Well, and I think one of the gifts I think that you bring in that situation is people want to be understood. They want
Yeah.
to know that they're seen. And because I'll give myself a little goosebumps thinking about you this way. When you were walking in to their home and they're like the lady you're going to go see this morning, I guarantee you right now, she is full of anxiety.
Oh yeah.
And you're going to walk in there and you're going to see her and you're going to listen to her and you're going to be there
Yep.
for her.
Yep.
And that service, that I know you do all the other things, but I really feel like that is one of the best things about your service is that you bring that awareness in with you and that lack of judgment. One of my values in my business is being of service. I was a teacher, and so I'm very much of that. And I think that's one of the reasons that I adore you and your business so much is because you are that advocate for your clients and you are building relationships. I think businesses should be built around relationships, just like it's not,
Yeah.
the fittest. I think it really should be the kindness,
Yeah.
kindest too.
Yeah.
So I love that you bring that. And so that really, in your environment where you are out there, I would think that advocacy and that coming from a place of service definitely sets you apart from your any competitors you might have in the market because you do bring that heart.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you wish people knew about your industry or knew before they started working for you? Like, what's something important for them to know before they? I mean, I think if they're listening to this, they probably already got a few things.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it goes back to, there will be no judgment.
Yeah.
And even though I'm somebody with a lot of energy, a stupid amount of energy, I I know that I can walk into a client's house and dial myself down so that I don't stress them out with, how quickly I'm moving. Do I
Hmm.
sometimes still do that? Sure.
Sure.
Um, Sometimes I feel that that is what I need to do for the sake
Hmm.
of getting through the,
Hmm.
whatever process we're going through, especially when we're like packing for clients. I mean, that's just kind of like, let's just get this done. And the number of times I hear from clients, oh my God, you did this so much faster than I thought you were going to be able to do it. Um, because that's where my head is, that's where my heart is, and we just come in and we do it. But we also don't want to overwhelm the client in those moments of where we got to really move a little bit faster. But it's that tricky balance all day long of
Yeah.
just make sure and checking in with them, making sure they're okay. There's a lot of hugging that takes place, I promise.
Yeah.
There's some crying that does take place, but there's
Sure.
also some laughter. I
Yeah.
mean, I always try and find those little moments where I can bring a little humor into the
Yeah.
situation. One of the things that I always say when I find like the first coin, or dollar bill is, oh, look, I found a penny. You're a penny richer. Let's make a bet. How much money are we going to find throughout the day? And
There you
whoever
go.
comes closer gets to keep it. They're like, oh, that's a great idea. And then they realize, wait, this is my money. Why do you get to keep
Why do you get to keep it? I'm like,
it?
wait a minute.
But they get it. They get that
Yeah.
I'm trying to,
Yeah, to
lighten things up.
lighten things up a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I thank you so much for coming. I want to make sure that everybody understands all of your services. So you do obviously if whether it's somebody just tidying, packing, moving, you want to talk a little bit about the variety of services and
Yeah,
what you
I think that the professional organizing business kind of evolved over the last 30 years, and more of us are getting more into move management.
hmm.
And that's because there's a very close correlation
Oh yeah, they
between,
go together.
you know, the preparation for a move,
Hmm.
especially if you're downsizing, the amount of decluttering that needs to
Mm,
take place so that you're not carrying forward things that you don't use anymore, you don't
yeah.
have a need for anymore. I talk about, especially with my seniors, you are carrying a burden. There is
Mm,
no reason to carry this. You already have enough burdens to think about,
mhm.
navigating this whole senior care living
Right.
stuff that is failing miserably in this country, but we need
That's
like
a whole
8 hours to talk about that.
exactly. We
Um,
could.
but it really is a burden, and you have to
Mhm.
think of your stuff that way. Even though you may love your stuff, at some point it really does become a burden. And
Mhm.
it's said all over the internet, your kids don't want this crap. They just
Mhm.
don't. So if you think you're leaving it for them, stop. Just stop.
Yeah.
And yes, I was playing mahjong last night, and an
Mhm.
elderly woman asked
Mhm.
me, she's like, what do I do with my china and crystal and silver? And I'm like, the silver, just sell it, to be melted down. She's like, what do you mean? I'm like, nobody wants silver anymore. It's too much maintenance. And
Yeah.
so just get out while the going's good, while silver is high,
There you go. There you
China
go.
and crystal, you're going to probably have to just give that away.
Yeah.
Nobody wants it, and you can't even really sell it anymore. There's just so much of it out there.
Yeah.
And I am somebody who, I'm very rich in life. My bank account, on the other hand, whatever. But
Entrepreneur life.
whatever. But I enjoy my life, right?
Yes.
But I also believe that there are always people that need more than I need.
Mhm.
So when I am looking and purging through my stuff, editing, decluttering, whatever you want to call it, I am constantly thinking of other people. I'm not looking to sell things, even
Yeah.
though I probably could, but the amount of time and energy that it takes, I don't
Hmm.
want, I live in Colorado. I want to be out
Right.
enjoying my life. It's the same reason I hire somebody to clean my tiny little 700 square feet of space in my house share
Hmm.
because I could do it. I can do
Hmm.
it, but why should I? And it's the same reason why people should
Yeah.
hire me. Maybe they can do it, but why should they go it alone? Why should they have to go it alone because society tells them that,
Well, and I think that's a great place for us to kind of wrap up because I think that really what it comes down to, whatever we're dealing with, whether it's entrepreneurship, mental health, a tidy space, some combination of the three, we can reach out and ask for help because
yeah,
there are people just like you that
yep.
are willing to share their gifts. I wrote down here, I was like, okay, this is how I want to laugh up. I'm like, so Beth in a nutshell, Sherpa, therapist, super organizer, and empathizer.
Aw,
I,
thank you.
I love that. Thank you so much
Appreciate
for
you.
coming and spending some time with us today. I will put this out and put links out there for everybody. Follow
Send it
Beth.
to Susan.
Yes, I will send it to Susan. And yeah, I would love for people, if you're in the Boulder area, even if you don't need an organizer, reach out to Beth.
Actually,
She's
I travel all over the country.
Yeah, that's right. You
I
do.
do.
You've been to, just in the past couple of months, you've been to New York and Florida and California, and you've
No
been all
Florida.
over.
No more
Oh,
Florida.
no more Florida. But anyway,
Oklahoma. Oklahoma.
Oklahoma.
Yeah.
But organizer willing to travel.
Yes.
So she can come to you wherever you are.
Hmm.
I love that so very much. So I look forward to sharing you again. Thank you so much for coming and spending some time
Thanks.
with us today.
Bye.